So Christoph, by virtue of alphabetization, either by first name or last name or organization, you get to be the first to introduce yourself.
Hey, okay. Hey, everybody. My name is Christoph Bogaerts. I'm part of Proximus. Proximus is a telecom company located in Brussels, in Belgium. And within the company, I think I've been working there for 20 years almost. And I mainly was working in the quality assurance area. And in the last 3 to 4 years, one of my responsibilities became test automation, and then also becoming responsible for applying more service authorization within the company. That's in a nutshell my introduction.
All right, thanks. Kyle,
and perhaps, yeah, we are using in the company for Parasoft, I think it's already our 4th year, 4 years, something like that, that we are using the software for the moment.
Okay, great. So Kyle, we just kind of did your intro, so I think we'll just if you don't know that Kyle's from Santander at this point, go back, watch the previous part. And then we also have with us today Joe Colantonio, who's with Test Guild, and he does some pretty interesting stuff. So Joe, go ahead and introduce yourself.
You able to hear me out there before I go on my spiel?
Yeah.
Awesome. So I'm Joe Colantonio, founder of Test Guild. It's basically an education platform that includes our blog, podcasts, and online events for a community of 32,000 software testers, really dedicated to creating what I call automation awesomeness. I've interviewed over 400 people on my podcast, so I have a lot of experience from what other people are doing in the real world, and I've also been an automation engineer for almost 25 years.
Excellent. So thank you very much. So we've got a couple of questions that we had planned to talk about, and we've had some fascinating conversations about it. And it looks like there's a few of the questions that had come up that were kind of pointed at Kyle, but I think will fit the panel well. So I'll work those in when they hit the right moment, because I think a couple of them dovetail perfectly into what we had all planned on talking about anyway. So the first one, I guess, Kyle, you've been talking forever, but we're going to let you go first anyway. The first question that I have is, what is service virtualization? Like, what's it for? What problems are you solving with it? Because it's kind of a weird name, right? Like, talk to us about.
Yeah. So service virtualization, I like to give it at its simplest form, intelligent stubbing. So the reason why I say it's intelligent stubbing is because it's not just mocking, like your Mockito frameworks, that sort of stuff. You're actually emulating the environments themselves. So, it's a bit more clever. So you're making a payment, for example, you can deduct the balance, you can store that balance variable, you can move it on, you can respond like an actual a payment system or a mainframe would, essentially. And then I think some of the key benefits, it all depends on the sort of area, really. I mean, we've seen it in Barclays, Santander, in various different places, mainly around efficiency, really. The making things faster, allowing you to deliver faster, removing that sort of legacy technology, especially within banks, because a lot of banks still use the legacy mainframes, which are the solid. Nothing against these mainframes, but they're all getting quite old now. So we want to remove that dependency and remove the pressure, considering years ago there wasn't as many customer bases as we're seeing now, so they weren't built for these sorts of loads and this sort of stuff. So I think with service virtualization, it gives you that benefit of removing the dependencies, allowing you to performance test faster, finding defects a lot earlier, removing basically everything in the lower environments itself. Allows you to find things quicker, find defects quicker, all that sort of stuff. So I think hopefully that was a good enough explanation.
Cool. So Christoph, you have anything to add to either the explanation or what kind of challenges you've been using service virtualization to solve?
Yeah, I think for us in the last year and this year, we were facing some issues in our production environment, and then the management gave us the message like, guys, you need to do a bit more shift left testing, so meaning doing more testing at the early stage. And for me, this is indeed trying to test as much as possible, as early as possible. That is one thing. Next to that is also in our company, we are having a lot of interactions with some other vendors, some important vendors like a Netflix or a Norton application. And you want to be able to test everything yourself, and you don't want to be dependent on these other companies. And the service for virtualization, it allows you to simulate these vendor applications, and it makes you become independent of them. Before, for example, if you work with Netflix, you need to adapt your planning according to their standards. They will not listen to a smaller company like Proximus. So this is something that you want to avoid. And here, service virtualization will help you. You can simulate all those vendor interfaces easily, and you can do that testing whenever you want to do it. So that's something that we try to apply for all our vendor interfacing APIs.
Yeah, I always think that's interesting because a lot of times you just don't have the ability with a third party to do what you'd like to do. So it's a great way to use it. Joe.
Yeah, so I actually have a similar example. I used to work for a healthcare company on a radiology application. And one of the issues was it was a portal, and you had to interact with a bunch of different in-house and third-party applications. For instance, we had a doctor transcription app that would feed into it. And to test it, you had to work with the third-party vendor to get the latest version, configure it correctly in all the environments. And then you had to get some licensing to make sure it worked. And it was just a mess. And no one ever knew how to stand it up correctly. So we'd be testing and we'd go to the production and nothing would work as you thought it would be. So what we did is we just stood up a service virtualization, a virtual server that acted just like it. We knew what the protocol was, what the responses were supposed to be. So it's really like acting just like it would if it was the real thing. So when we merged the code, we were able to first develop and test all our features and have confidence that once everything was merged to the master branch environment where the real service lived, there were no surprises. So it really helped speed up the software development lifecycle and really reduce poor quality code from being merged.
All right. So I have a bit of a curveball for the panel here, right? Because this came in live. We have a real question, right? So it was, what kinds of organizational change did you need to institute to incorporate these capabilities? Did you have a center of excellence already? And what about transition to agile processes for continuous testing? So Christoph, I'll let you go first this time.
Yeah, I think the adoption within our company, I can't remember that it was really like a struggle or so. I think it's, of course, first you need to make the publicity that there is a tool available that can do certain things. So it would mean that internally within the company, you need to set up some road shows in the different areas. You need to go to your IT department. You need to go to some other departments where they could benefit from it, and start explaining the tool, start giving some practical demos about features. That is one thing. And then the second part, which is of course as well important for the adoption, that is then once people start using the team, that indeed there is a kind of center of excellence where people can go to for questions, that you have good training material already available, that you have some example simulations that you can give already to people so that they don't need to start from scratch, but they already start with a few examples that they can try out. I think those are the two important aspects if you want to make sure that the full company can benefit from the tool or the service.
Yeah, it can be quite tricky. Joe,
perhaps some other aspect that we try to do is part of our center of excellence. We try to follow the approach, train the trainer. So we have several workshops where we gave to a spoke of each team, and then it is up to the spoke of each team to learn the internal people to educate them as well on it. So that's a program that we try to set up within the whole company.
Yeah, and it's interesting as I talk to people, like everybody has a different approach to, how centralized versus decentralized, and I think a lot of it does depend on your organization, what's going to work well. Joe, I'm going to go out of order just for a second because Christoph just mentioned something about train the trainer, and what we heard from Kyle a few minutes ago sounded similar to that.
Yeah, so at Santander, we've taken the approach of we've got something called an academy. So what the academy is depending on your role profile when you join the bank, it is mandatory for you to go through certain videos, training videos, certain technologies that we use within the bank itself. And then at the end of this, you're then quizzed on it. So all sort of third-party contractors, this is mandatory for, and then we give this to new joiners when they start off. So what they've got is we've got a whole section on service virtualization for QA and development profiles, so they're aware of the product when they come into the bank, so they're there, they know how to use the tool, they know what the tool is, who to contact. So I think this has been really sort of beneficial for us, to like you say, training people prior to them coming into the organization, so they've got that knowledge, they know where to go. And I think that's what sets probably Santander apart from a lot of other organizations, just letting them know the personal technology that they're going to be using with the videos and the trainings and stuff like that, which is adapted to their profile. So even when they get their laptop, they're going to get the virtualization software on their laptop as they begin. So they're going to be questioning already, oh, what's this? Oh yeah, I've already watched a video on this. I know how to use it. Let me test it out. Let me use it for this sort of use case. So I think that's how we've sort of got the sort of training into Santander UK.
Thanks. So Joe, you're in a unique position here because you've done the real thing for someone else, and now I'd have to say you've got both feet in the knowledge training camp, but
Right.
Tell us about it.
Sure. I guess when I was working full-time as an automation engineer, I was mostly outside the sprint teams. I had 7 to 8 sprint teams. And so I would check out products, see how they worked. I'd find issues that were low-hanging fruit and then implement it and then share with the teams what I found to try to get buy-in. So in team retrospectives, I do a demo of a new technology and get buy-in. Like we demoed something called a report portal that helps you analyze failures really quickly. So once you have people actually see it in action, everyone's going to jump on, usually in my experience, and want to use it if it's going to save them time. And I also acted almost like a coach for the sprint teams as well. So we'd have weekly meetings. And obviously, I'd record those sessions. And similar to Kyle, we'd kind of have a page where people would go in, see those trainings as well as part of their onboarding. But a lot of people I speak to, most of them that tend to do really well is when they do have almost, I know Center of Excellence is people that try moving away from it, but I really think you need someone that's in that type of leadership role that is looking at the new technology and then sharing it with the full teams to really get buy-in from what they need to do to really get over some hurdles that they may not be able to focus in on full-time themselves.
Okay, so and do you see like organizations leveraging like Test Guild as a way to augment basic skills? I know it won't be local to the organization, but
yeah, no, surprising, a lot of companies join my online events, and it's usually big teams. So they do leverage it, and they do get access to the recordings after the fact. So that's one thing. I know there's other companies, I don't know if I'm allowed to mention, have online academies that I know people use as part of their onboarding. I know one person in Germany, I'm blanking on his name, but as part of their onboarding, they have Test Guild and have these other companies as part of their onboarding where they go, they almost have a syllabus, right? Watch this at this company, watch this at Test Guild, read this at Test Guild, and they keep it up to date, and that seems to work really well for them.
well, I think, like from the three of you, what I'm hearing is that just handing somebody a tool and walking away isn't the path to success, right?
Right, that's so true.
Right, that they know what the tool is, how to use it, what the other tools are, et cetera, providing some kind of knowledge for them, right? That's so critical to successful rollouts, right?
That's a big problem. Even with the open source, people just download it and get up and running with it, but they don't necessarily are trained on how to actually utilize it correctly. So I think it's a good point, Arthur.
Yeah, and best practices for successful scalability, right? When
Yeah.
we start talking about, large numbers of releases going very, very quickly, it's easy to break something, and so it's yeah, in the organizations I've seen over the last 30 years, the ones who take time to make sure that people know what are the tools in the tool chain, how do we use them, where do I go to get training, whether they provide the training or whether we point to the training, but providing those kinds of capabilities really helps people succeed at scale. There's another question, and I think it's really timely for what we had planned to talk about anyway, which was how does service virtualization coordinate with other testing processes in the overall DevOps pipeline? So Joe, you just talked, but you haven't gone first yet, so I'm going to give you another crack.
So what was the question? How do you utilize a service with the other
How does
teams?
service virtualization fit with the other testing processes and into the DevOps pipeline?
I think it just helps your team. I just give an example from my real world. I work with 7 to 8 sprint teams, and the way they did Agile was kind of weird. They'd have experts on certain areas where one would just work on database, one would work on a front end, one would work on the API. So it wasn't vertical slices. So each team had a story that they had to implement, but it had a dependency on another team. So we had to stand up virtual services for what that team would eventually do, so we could finish our story. So when we all merged up, it wasn't a big, I can't say the word, but it wasn't a big mess, I guess is the word to use. So using that service virtualization, you could share it among teams as well as a resource to be used among the different sprint teams. So when you're doing CI/CD before you merge your code up, everyone's using the same services, and there are no surprises. How I've leveraged it.
All right. So Christoph, how about you? How are you fitting service virtualization in with your other processes in pipeline?
Yeah, for me, or what we try to communicate within the company when they are indeed doing their deployments and they want to add some basic tests already in their deployments, they don't need to have the full scope of testing as part of their deployment. It needs to be smaller tests, and the tests need to be predictable. So here the service virtualization can help to make sure that you have test data which will be predictable, which can be repeated many times, and that you don't need to use the real backends, I would say. So that is for me. If you try to do the CI/CD part and you want to add some testing component in it, try to limit the amount of tests and make sure that the tests that are kind of predictable and that they can be repeated very frequently. And for that, you need to simulate certain test data, or you need to simulate certain backends that are perhaps not always stable for doing your testing. And if you do these things, then the testing part as part of your deployment will be very quick and short done, and will not give you any false positives or so. So that's also important to apply this.
Yeah, very cool. Kyle, what do you think?
So yeah, I think for well, 2 parts is the sort of the functional, for example, and regression. You've got your testing and isolation. You know that pack's going to pass because the data is absolutely solid, it's static. So if there's any changes with the new microservice architecture, it's going to be the code itself. Nothing else has changed. The data's not changed. The backend's not changed. It's just the code itself. So when you do these nightly runs, because a lot of teams in Santander UK, test nightly now, because they could continuous change going on all the time. They've got the pipelines running consistently, and they know that if there is an issue, it's because there's a change in the code itself. So it really enables that sort of testing faster every day. You're not going to be able to do that in another world without service virtualization. You can't get the data right. You can't get all the systems up at the same time. So that's what I think really sort of segregates it for the benefits in terms of like regression and functional. And then you come to your non-functional testing as well, where you've got your performance tests and stuff like that. You've got your legacy tech that you can't, like databases, for example. You don't want to absolutely hammer these databases with put requests or deletes, and delete all this data out of like the database sort of thing. So you're protecting these databases, you're protecting these mainframes, and that allows you to actually go into that continuous delivery pipeline and create these pipelines themselves, because you can run it and know you're not going to come tomorrow and then the DBA is going to shout at you saying, what have you done with all this data? Why is there 1 million rows inserted into the database? This sort of stuff as well. So I think, that's how it enables it for me and Santander personally.
Yeah, and I think there was a kind of a follow-up for you from your earlier talk that fits right well with that, which is, it's an interesting talk and question in the context of service virtualization. They're asking, do you take the environment down when not in use?
So that is a good question. What we do is usually we set up for existing stuff, for example, we set up the proxies. So Parasoft has the proxy mechanism, and what we do is when they run these, say, performance tests, for example, we let them run against service virtualization, because we can handle that load. We can handle all this data sets being chucked out of us, this sort of stuff. We've got it there, scalable in the cloud and on premises, ready to go. And then what happens then is the teams can then switch to the actual service, because we still need end-to-end at the end of the day. We still need to do that end-to-end validation. So I think by having that proxy, it enables us to do that. So if that is classed as bringing the environment down, I mean, it's always up and running, it's always available for you. So we don't officially bring it down, but we do switch.
Yeah. Do Joe or Christoph, you have any further thoughts on that?
No, we did something similar. I think we used Parasoft. You have a self-service management solution. So it allowed us to easily have our team switch between either live or virtual. And it just made the process even easier for people to just switch on and off and know where they're going against at any given time.
I have this, the mantra that we use here is deploy and destroy, right? It's the paper plates of testing, right? Instead of washing dishes, right? Like I deploy a test environment, I don't clean it up and reset it when I'm done. I just dispose of it, right? I'm throwing the china in the trash, right? Starting over. To me, that's like the ultimate thing, right? Like that I don't have to do setup because the environment gets instantiated in the right state. And I don't have to clean up, right? I'm stepping out of the house and torching it at the end of the party. Right?
Yeah, with that test data, it's really handy to start with the golden copy when you start your test run and just destroy it when you're done. And just it's easy to set up and down without keeping it running all the time, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So we have one other interesting question, and I'm just going to let you guys chime in, whichever one wants to talk first. But one of the things that I've noticed over the years is that once people get service virtualization up and running, they got it cranking, it's working well in their test environment, they often discover some new interesting way to take advantage of the fact that they have this fully controllable environment. So what have you done or seen? Anybody wants to jump in?
Yeah, I think for us at Proximus, so we've always been using the tool mainly in the test environments for testing more and earlier. But one thing that we started to use in the last year is then having a dedicated training environment. Because we have a lot of call centers. Those call centers, a lot of those people, they need to be trained. We cannot tell to them, you need to go to our user acceptance test environment. You need to do there your training. That cannot work. So for those people in the call center, we have certain applications installed on a separate environment, and all the other backends are simulated over there. So we are not using it only purely in test-related environments, but we also use it in our dedicated training environment, which is, I would say, it requires more availability. It needs to be more stable. When you're organizing sessions with 200 call center people, you cannot afford that somebody is doing a deployment by accident or something is down for 50 minutes. You cannot do it. So you need something separate, dedicated, and it must be stable, and it needs to be up and running most of the time, so that they can organize those trainings whenever they want, or whenever there is a need to train those people. And this is something for us, it's now fully separated from within the test environments. We are not using any test environment anymore for training material purposes.
Very nice. Kyle or Joe, anything to add?
Think one of the main ones for us is it sort of set like a sort of cultural change. So we had these teams using it, and what we noticed is, so development and tests, you know, we've noticed in big organizations don't really speak to each other or work together. You know, they're very sort of segregated and isolated many times, unless it comes to raising a defect and fixing the defect and releasing the defect. But what we've sort of noticed is with service virtualization, it brings them together. So they can be like, oh, so test, oh, we built this service, and development, oh really? Like, can we use that sort of thing? You know, this will really help us out. You know, and it sort of gets them in that sort of friendly state, talking to each other, and then each team are understanding more of each other's jobs. So they're understanding more of the tester's role, and the developers understanding more of like the developer's role itself, which I found sort of, especially working in both previously, quite fascinating how it sort of brings these two teams together.
Yeah, so very, very valid.
I like how you can use it for negative testing. I know chaos engineering is really critical, so I like standing up a virtual service, breaking it on purpose, and see how the application reacts to it, so make sure it's resilient. So I know a lot of teams have been doing that as well.
Yeah, so great. Yeah, I think it is interesting. All of those are like interesting options, getting people to collaborate, right? To bringing like online support people, right, into using what we think of as a test environment as a training environment, right? And Joe, you're an agent of chaos, right? So but it is one of my favorite uses as well, right? Like let's do bad things everywhere in the system because we can virtualize them. Yeah. So it's been a fascinating thing. I appreciate all of you joining with us today.